Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Random House Children's Books Spring Preview, with special guests Chrystal D. Giles, Jennifer L. Holm, and David Levithan. I am Ronnie Curry, Books for Youth Associate Editor at Booklist. And before we begin, I will go over some technical details. If you are in the audience, you are in listen-only mode, but we do welcome any questions that you might have. So on the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question, if you need technical assistance, just click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we will pass along all other questions to today's panelists. So they'll be able to follow up with you after the webinar. And we do have a Q&A coming up momentarily, so if you ever have questions for our authors, you feel free to put those in there as well. We'll try to get to them during the webinar, but if not, again, we can follow up afterwards with answers. Links to today's slides and title list were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. If you want to download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. You can also download these materials at any time by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. A bit later, we will have the pleasure of hearing from the following members of the school and library team at Random House Children's. Adrian Weintraub, Executive Director, School and Library Marketing. Kristen Schultz, Senior Manager, School Marketing. Natalie Capagrossi, Assistant Manager, School Marketing. Shaughnessy Miller, Coordinator, Library Marketing, and Erica Stone, Coordinator, School Marketing. But before we hear from them and their title presentation, we are going to kick off the webinar with an author panel. So we are going to have the pleasure of hearing from Chrystal D. Giles, Jennifer L. Holm, and David Levithan. I will introduce each of them, and then they will introduce their books to you, and after that, we will have our Q&A. So first up, we will hear from Chrystal D. Giles. Chrystal is an Own Voices writer with a strong focus on creating stories that bring the hopes and hurdles of African American children to the mainstream children's book market. She is a member of SCBWI and was selected as a 2018 We Need Diverse Books mentee. One of Chrystal's poems appears in the poetry anthology Thank You, Poems of Gratitude from Learner. She lives with her family in Charlotte, North Carolina, and her debut middle grade novel is Take Back the Block, which she will now introduce us to. Thank you for joining us today, Chrystal.
Hello, everyone. Take Back the Block is my debut middle grade novel. It features Wes. He's a cool kid. He loves basketball and video games. He does not love being dragged from one community event to another by his activist parents. Activism does eventually become personal for Wes when a powerful developer targets his neighborhood. Wes has lived in Kensington Oaks his whole life, and it's also the neighborhood that his mother grew up in. And quite frankly, he doesn't want to leave. The adults in the neighborhood start to fight and argue, and they can't quite figure out what to do. So Wes gathers up his friend group and he goes on a mission to save his neighborhood. While all that's going on, he also navigates his changing friendships. We all know that during the middle grades, all kind of things happen with our friends. We gain some, we lose some, we argue with friends, and sometimes the friends become crushes. So while we'll follow Wes as he navigates saving his neighborhood, we'll also follow him navigate all of those changing friendships. It's a story I love and a story that I hope you'll enjoy as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chrystal. Next up, we will hear from Jennifer L. Holm. Jenny is a New York Times bestselling children's author and the recipient of 3 Newbery Honors for her novels Our Only May Amelia, Penny from Heaven, and Turtle in Paradise. Jenny collaborates with her brother, Matthew Holm, on 2 graphic novel series, the Eisner Award-winning Baby Mouse series and the best-selling Squish series, which I believe is a TV show now. She lives in California with her husband and 2 children, and her newest middle grade novel is The Lion of Mars. Welcome, Jenny.
Hi everybody. It's great to be here. I can't wait till we can do this in person again, but in the meantime, this is super fun. The Lion of Mars is my first real science fiction book. It takes place in 2091 on Mars, and it follows the life and adventures of an 11-year-old boy named Bell. Now, Bell lives underground in the American settlement on Mars with his cat Leo, and some other teenagers, 4 other teenagers, and a bunch of adults, and that comprises the American settlement. Bell is obsessed with earth animals, and he's a super curious kid. And he, as the book goes on, he becomes very curious as to why the American settlement is not in contact with the other foreign settlements on Mars. There are 4 other countries on Mars: France, Finland, China, and Russia, and they all have their own settlements as well. But the children are forbidden from having any contact with the other settlements. And as the book goes on, we eventually find out why. So that's a little bit about The Lion of Mars, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you very much. Our final introduction will come from David Levithan. David is known for his young adult novels. Some of his many acclaimed novels and story collections include 19 Love Songs, Every Day, Two Boys Kissing, and Boy Meets Boy. His best-selling collaborations include Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, Dash and Lily's Book of Dares, and The 12 Days of Dash and Lily, written with Rachel Cohen. David has now written his first middle grade novel, The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden S., as told to his brother. Thank you for joining us, David.
Thank you, Ronnie, and it's awesome to be here with you and with Chrystal and with Jenny. I am imagining that I'm in a huge auditorium-style conference room in a convention center. I have the temperature set to 50 degrees to try to simulate what it's like to be at ALA with you. I'm so excited about this book, and I'm so excited to be able to share it with you. The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden S., as told to his brother, is about a boy named Lucas whose brother, Aiden, disappears. He is gone for 6 days, and they call the police. They look all over town. They look all over the house, trying to find his brother. And then after 6 days, Aiden returns, and Aiden returns with an explanation for where he's been that nobody really can believe, including Lucas. And so it's really a story about belief. It's a story about the stories that we tell. And basically the premise, without giving too much away and being too much a spoiler, is, so what if your brother disappeared for 6 days and it was really serious and really intense and came back and basically said that he was in Narnia the whole time? How would you react to that? What would you do? And how would your family deal with that knowledge of a brother who has this story that nobody believes? So that's all I'm going to say. There are twists, there are turns, and I hope you enjoy it.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And I'm going to invite the other 2 panelists to show their faces once more as we begin our Q&A. Again, if you're in the audience, the Q&A is open to you, but I will kick things off with my own questions. So it just so happens that you're all presenting middle grade fiction, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So I will go one by one through you, and I'm going to start with Jenny to ask you about your premise and how it fits into middle grade. So Jenny, you're no stranger to middle grade, of course, but you don't see a lot of science fiction in middle grade, and certainly not this kind of quiet domestic sci-fi that you've written here. So please tell us kind of what inspired that idea and how you think it works for middle graders.
Hi. I'm so sorry. There we are. Yes, so it was really, this book about the future was actually inspired by the past. My father grew up on a small farm in Washington State, and his family, they were Finnish and they came from Finland to America in the 1800s. And I often thought about it later that they may as well have gone to Mars because, you know, they never went home again. That was what the distance was like. And as I thought about what it would be like to live on Mars, I really, instead of imagining it as like this high-tech world with technology and space, I thought that really the first kind of settlements on Mars are going to be like a small family farm where they're just going to be having to be able to survive and thrive. You know, we're going to have to learn how to garden again. People are going to have to be their own handymans because you're not going to be able to call anybody. So I pictured living on Mars more as a kind of a small family farm situation.
Love it. Thank you. Chrystal, let me ask you, same question more or less, but your story is, it's rooted in activism and social justice, although it's much more than that. So I don't want to pigeonhole it too much, but the main characters are sixth graders. So again, where did the spark for the general idea come from, and why did you think this was important for that middle grade audience?
Yeah, so the original inspiration really just came from my hometown. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, and it, like most cities in the nation, are experiencing displacement and gentrification of marginalized communities. And so I grew up in this town, and so I drive around the city, and sometimes a restaurant will be there 1 month, gone the next. Some areas of town will be completely wiped out or different over the passing years. And so while I experienced that on a personal level, I also thought about the families and children and how it impacts just the young people, like what happens when your family is uprooted. So families came into it from that perspective. And then also, I think in the middle grades, when you're 8 and 9 and 10, you really start to experience your community. You look around and say, this is different. And you start to think about how those changes come about. And this story does also encourage young people to speak up and speak out, use your voice. And I think it's the perfect age range to start to cultivate opinions and voice and learning how to speak up.
I agree. And I appreciate that about your book. David, so you, as your bio established, are well known for YA. And you have quite an intriguing premise. So what inspired the premise, and why was this the story that brought you to middle grade?
I mean, I think it's hand in hand. I think the premise really was the thing that fueled it. Just that question of what would it be like to have a brother who came back and was like, while I was missing, I was in a fantasy world. How would that play out? And to do something that is realism, but with basically fantasy adjacent. And the reason it's middle grade is that I love middle grade, and the books that really meant a lot to me as a kid were all middle grade books. It was The Weston Game, it was Narnia, like From the Mixed Up Files. So I wanted to write a book in that vein, where basically taking all of my favorite parts of all of these books and sort of making it something of my own. And Rebecca Stead was my role model for that. I think she had the same influences and created an amazing work in When You Reach Me. And I thought, okay, well, what would mine look like? And I edit middle grade all the time, so I'm very familiar with the idiom. And so it was really great to just dive into that. And it felt right that the characters would be middle grade age for this particular story.
David, we have a couple of audience members already are curious if the switch, although like you said, you're not unfamiliar with middle grade, but if there are any challenges or surprises that came along with switching categories.
Well, I couldn't curse nearly as much, and the sex, I had to take the sex out. No, I really, because I had such amazing touchstones, both again, as a reader and as an editor, it was actually really easy to slip into that voice. And I think it also helped. It is a first person novel. So I was in the 11-year-old's headspace. And so naturally the story unfolded as an 11-year-old would tell it. And that made it so clearly middle grade that I never felt myself veering into YA at all, because I was so incredibly seeing the story through the lens of the main character.
Yeah. So my next question for all of you is character oriented. I want to talk about protagonists a bit. And I think we'll start with you, David, since you're in the flow. So these are all sort of character-driven stories. They're all in first person. Can you talk about the choice to tell the story through Lucas and not Aiden? I feel like you could have written two completely different novels from the same story, and it's such an interesting choice.
I mean, I think what makes it a mysterious disappearance is because there is no firsthand knowledge, that the person who's telling the story doesn't know whether it's true or not. And truly the whole story is about deciding whether it's true or not, and how much that matters when you're supporting a family member. And so it never was a question for me to do it from Aiden's point of view, because it's a completely different book, it's a completely different genre, but it also answers the central question that I wanted the whole book to ask, to do it from Aiden's point of view. And so I decided Lucas was the person to tell the story.
So the question was sort of the starting point for you.
Yeah.
Jenny, Belle is this really endearing, gentle kid who kind of is forced to step up and question what he's been taught. How do you get into the head of a kid raised on Mars? And I guess, did you do much research into that sort of thing as well?
Yeah, so I did a ton of research. I naively thought writing science fiction would be easier than writing historical fiction. It was oddly harder because, at least with historical fiction, there's an accepted agreement about some things in the past, like this is when the car was invented. But in the future, everybody's still hypothesizing. But I was lucky. I got to interact with a lot of amazing folks at NASA and at SpaceX and at the Mars Society, and really learned about what it would be like to live on Mars. And I really wanted it to be, I think when you're writing from a point of view of a kid, you just have to look at it as their world. So even though he's growing up on a very dangerous planet, which is potentially incredibly scary, his settlement is home, and it's cozy and it's warm and it's all he's ever known, and it's like loving and safe. But of course, the irony about this book is I wrote this book before COVID, and I'm going to give you the big cliffhanger in the book. Is what happens in the book is that they get a shipment of supplies from Earth, and there's a stowaway on the ship, a little mouse who brings a disease with them, a respiratory disease, which affects all of the adults. And so all the adults fall ill, and it's up to the children to try and get help. So that was very weird to have written that and then have this happen. So I feel like when I've been talking to kids lately and talking about what it's like to live on Mars, some of them have been saying, yeah, we're living through that right now. We've been isolated at home for the last year. So I think kids are going to really understand it, sadly.
Yeah. Chrystal, your protagonist, Wes, was raised on Earth. So you're writing contemporary realism. And I came away from reading it with this feeling that he was just the kind of quintessential middle grade protagonist. And what I realized what that meant was he felt so real to me with all the detail and kind of care you put into developing him. So can you just kind of take us through your writing process as far as developing Wes and capturing that voice? Was he based on anybody or anything like that?
Yeah, so he was not based on anybody. I love that you say that he feels real. It's probably one of the best compliments I get from the book, because I wanted him to feel real. I wanted him to feel like the kid on your block or the kid in your class. And I think making him feel that way was important for the story, because it delves into some serious topics. It's a little bit heavy in areas. And so I wanted Wes to be a vehicle for just normal kid stuff, right? Like I wanted him to feel cool and friendly. And I wanted him to kind of usher in this idea that you can be a regular kid, you can like what you like, and then you can also be dealing with these other things that feel heavy. So I started him really just like with small traits. Like I wanted him to be fashionable. He's a sneakerhead. He loves shoes. And so I wanted to give him those qualities. And then after that, I wanted to build in some other things. Um, he's a great friend. He struggles in the beginning with, knowing how to be a good friend. And so eventually he turns the corner and he realizes that he can be a better friend. And so those are all things I think young people deal with. Um, so I kind of just built little layers into him along the way.
Yeah. And I think almost equally important is his friend group, especially Takari. Could you talk a little bit about kind of, because I mean, you gave a lot of care to each of those. I mean, there's what, 5 of them or so. You really put some time into making their relationships real and each individual real. And it's not all heavy stuff. It's them hanging out. It's good times too. So could you talk about the group a little bit?
Sure. So in this neighborhood, there had to be a lot of kids. One, because I think it's realistic, and then two, because they grew up together. And so I think for the reader to really latch on to this neighborhood and love it the way Wes does, we needed to bring a lot of kids into it. You mentioned Takari. He touched my heart almost in the same way that Wes did. He is opposite of Wes in that he doesn't have a stable family. He's been through some tough times. And so I wanted to put him right in front of Wes so he could see that, your friend has been there with you, but he has difficulties. He has challenges that you don't have. And so I think sometimes people forget that they have privileges even if their friends don't. And so in this case, Wes has some privileges that Takari doesn't. And so it was important for me to put a character right next to him that maybe doesn't have all the same advantages that he does.
Yeah, that was a really effective foil of the 2 characters for sure. All right. So another round of questions for you all. This time I want to talk about community because that was sort of a through line that I found in your 3 books, albeit in different ways. So Jenny, I will start with you this time. I read somewhere that you studied international relations in college. I don't know if that's true, or how much that played into your writing here. But it feels like an especially important subject right now, given the last few years of American isolationism or whatever we're calling it. And in your story, one of the big things at stake is community and how it'll kind of come together or not. So was that something that was always in mind for you, or did it sort of rise out of your process?
So it was always in mind for me. I think so I grew up in a house of boys. I had 4 brothers and my dad, and they all read science fiction. And one thing about the books and just the genre is that it seems a lot to focus on cool weapons and cool ships and aliens. And I was more interested in like, what would family look like on Mars? And it's something that even people talk about now is like, if we live on Mars and settle on Mars, how are we going to get people to stay there? Because it's unclear that if you live on Mars, how your bones will be affected and your muscles. So it might be a one-way trip. And it'll be kind of literally a whole new world, like who's going to get which little chunk of land. And so I always saw it as really a story about the relationship of the entire planet. How will the other countries get along? And how easily can things go wrong? And what was really, really wonderful is when, after I'd finished it, I sent it to a scientist at NASA, and he said he had gone on there are a lot of places or a lot of groups who are doing sort of kind of like modeling what it would live like on Mars. Like they'll go hang out in Antarctica and see what it's like, or live in a cave and just try to figure out how living will be like. And he said he'd had that exact same experience happen to him in Antarctica, where he was there with different countries and they had a falling out and they wouldn't talk. And he said, I can see that happening because it's already happened to me. So I think one of the biggest problems is going to be, how are we going to have community and relationships when we're in a whole new world?
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject that I don't know that I encountered in middle grade before. David, so I'm a big middle grade fantasy fan, I should say, and I found it so striking that the thing that haunted Aiden the most, at least that I took from it, was his loss of that community from what we're calling the Narnia world. And a lot of what he and Lucas go through in the aftermath is based in kind of their Earth community and the reaction and fitting back into that versus what was left behind, I think. So again, was that? I feel like I've read that you're a discovery writer on some level. I don't know if that's true, but was this something that sort of evolved out of the story, or did you kind of know going into that question that would be one of the core struggles?
No, I mean, I'm a pantser. I don't know anything when I start writing, and I write the story to find the story. And so, in coming up with Aiden's story, I really was doing world building on the fly. But it was interesting. I mean, it is an interesting exercise as a writer to when you discover what rises to the surface and is the most important. And I think it is more than sort of cool creatures you can invent and everything like that. It is the feeling of belonging. It is the feeling of finding a place where you actually belong and you contribute. And certainly that is part of what Aiden misses, as well as just the idea of being somewhere that nobody he knows has ever been before, and being basically a pioneer amongst his cohort and trying to navigate that. And just, you don't get that sense from being in the house where you grew up. I say this while sitting in the house where I grew up. It's just, you don't understand what you have until you leave it. But then there is this duality of, certainly you can appreciate your home, the Wizard of Oz, the Dorothy, there's no place like home. But also on the flip side, there is something of your importance and of what you discovered in the other place that you would naturally miss if you knew that you could never go back there. And all of this to say, whether Aiden actually went someplace or whether this is a story he's inventing, it almost doesn't matter, because he is very much in the throes of it. And I think that is what Lucas has to navigate while he's hearing about this story of sort of what does it mean to Aiden, whether or not it's true.
And on that note, we have an audience question, David, asking kind of more specifically about the line between realism and fantasy in the book. So could you just speak a little bit to kind of the overall nature of the grounding in realism? I guess they're wondering in general how to categorize it, more or less.
I mean, I think I love that it's not particularly categorizable, or it's realism that's fantasy adjacent. I mean, I was telling a story about my novel every day that another author, after I was done, said, "Oh, that's great. You just wrote your first science fiction novel." And I was like, "Wait, it's a science fiction novel? I didn't realize that. I have somebody hopping into a different body every day. It should have occurred to me." But I wrote it as realism because to me, it was real. This is the world. And I was writing it the same way that I would write purely realistic novel. And I think the same is true for this book, that I wrote it as realism. It's a family story. It is about what happens when somebody comes back and tells this fantastical story. And so that had to be the approach. And so, again, I don't think, is it realism? That's up for debate. Once you've read the book, you can decide. But I wrote it certainly as realism, but within that realism, there is one character who is definitely spinning a fantasy. And whether it's true or not, again, remains to be seen.
Perfect. Chrystal, we have time for just the one more question, so I'll let you round it out here. Again, on community, and again, you put so much kind of love and effort into developing Kensington Oaks, Wes's neighborhood, as well as his relationships with his friends, the community members. You really put some time into it. And you mentioned that it was maybe partially inspired by Charlotte or things you've seen before. So could you talk a little more about the community as a whole, your inspirations, and kind of what you hope young readers will take away about community?
Yeah, sure. So I think community really is the heart of the story. And, like you said, I really wanted Kensington Oaks to feel to feel real. Like, so even though readers may not directly experience what's going on in the neighborhood, I do think, similar to what David said about, you know, that this is where you're from and you don't want to leave it. And so readers will definitely relate to having a home and not wanting to leave that home. And so that's really the heart of what the story is about, is this is where I live, this is where my history is, and I don't want to go. And so I really wanted the community to feel like another character, so that you'd root for Wes and his friends, even if you didn't relate to the community. You say, okay, that's where they want to be, so I want them to also be there. So the community part of it was really the heart of the story for me.
Yeah, it really came through. I was really struck by that, how real it felt again. And that's it for our Q&A, folks. We're going to, well, I'm going to thank our three authors for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was lovely to hear about your books. And we're going to hear about many more books from the Random House Children's team. So we can sign off on our cameras. Thank you again. And I'm going to pass it over to Adrian.
Thank you, Ronnie. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ronnie, and thank you, David, Chrystal, and Jenny. We at Random House Children's Books are really excited about all of our books, and especially those three, strong middle grade, that we're really excited to bring you. And now you're going to hear for the rest of the RHCB list. We have a long list, but it's full of really great stories and information for all ages. You'll see that we have grouped them in some themes that we think might stand out for you and might help you kind of prioritize and put them in some sort of an order. We're going to start first with What's Inside a Flower. From Rachel Ignatowski, the creator of the New York Times bestseller, Woman in Science, comes a new nonfiction picture book series ready to grow young scientists by nurturing their curiosity about the natural world. And we're starting with this book, What's Inside a Flower. Young scientists and flower lovers can start exploring their world with a stunning introduction to these showstoppers, from seeds to roots to blooms, a nice supplement to many science lessons. And then Tremendous, Diary of a Not Yet Mighty Oak. This adorable picture book illustrates the life of a tiny acorn growing up to be a tall oak tree. It's a wonderful introduction to nonfiction for curious nature-loving kids. And then we're going to move on. In A House for Every Bird, a young artist's drawings rebel against her when she tries to put her sketched birds in houses that match how they look, but not how they feel. This hilarious picture book explores the important message of teaching kids to respect personal preferences and not make assumptions about identity. My First Day is a visually stunning story of resilience and determination by an award-winning new author-illustrator team from the Make Me a World imprint. This is no ordinary first journey. The raining season has come to the Mekong Delta, and On, a young Vietnamese boy, sets out alone in a wooden boat, wearing a little backpack and armed only with a single oar. On the way, he is confronted by giant crested waves, heavy rainfall, and an eerie forest. Although he's daunted by the dark, On realizes that he is not alone and continues to paddle. He knows it'll all be worth it when he reaches his destination, school on the first day. In a starred review, Kirkus said, enthralling, uplifting, a celebration of everyday heroes' journeys in the quest for education and learning. And what more can we say about a book like that? And then you might remember Mr. Tiffin, the teacher in How Many Seeds in a Pumpkin. This time, the school library and a free little library take center stage, and a woodworking project helps a young student become a book lover. In a starred review, the reviewer called the book groundbreaking because of its casual inclusion of a non-binary librarian. And best-selling and beloved characters Toot and Puddle return 25 years after their debut with a brand new story full of the same charm and whimsy that originally made them so popular. In a tale about sharing and finding out the whole story, Holly Hobbie renders these beloved characters in exquisite watercolor and has us rooting for them to the end. And then We Are a Garden. This lyrical and extremely timely picture book dives through centuries of history in North America by examining different kinds of immigrants arriving in a new land. It's perfect for classroom discussions about history and the intricacies of immigration, and its short, beautifully written texts make it perfect for reading aloud. There is also extensive back matter with a glossary of terms and a note from the author. And I'm going to turn it over to Natalie.
Great. Thank you, Adrian. My name is Natalie, and I'm really excited to talk with you about a few picture books that fill an important social emotional learning need about growing self-confidence, beginning with Welcome Flower Child. Welcome Flower Child is a celebration of nature and what makes each of us special. The book's soft illustrations reveal the qualities of children born in each month of the year and the accompanying flower that blooms in that birth month. Explore this picture book to learn about the different flowers and personalities that make up our beautiful world. Next slide. I Am Not a Penguin. This is a story about a penguin's identity crisis. In case you didn't hear me, this is a story about a pangolin, not a penguin. When the other animals have never heard of a pangolin, the main character has a frustrating time trying to explain what makes him, well, unique. This hilarious story will introduce kids to an animal they might not have heard of before and a narrator who lets us know what it feels like to be misunderstood. Gee, My Name is Girl. This celebration of girlhood is sure to inspire and empower everyone that reads it. Joyful and diverse, it introduces readers to different names and positive character traits as it takes us on a journey around the world. Big Feelings. From the creators of the beloved read aloud, All Are Welcome, comes a vibrant and big-hearted book about feelings. Help children put emotions into words and develop the practice of moving through emotional difficulties with this charming book and its enjoyable characters. Be sure to download and share the RHCB activities for Big Feelings to further support social emotional learning in young readers. Let's taco about How Great You Are, a new, hilarious picture book that lets your food be silly. Filled with puns and characters you'll want to meet, this is a book that makes giving compliments cool. This is good for building confidence and great if you're looking for a fun and zany read aloud. More Than Fluff is a lesson about consent, narrated by Daisy, one very fluffy little chick who is always getting hugged and cuddled, even when she doesn't want to be. That is, until Daisy uses her voice to set boundaries. Give kids a model for boundary setting with this delightful picture book. When Penelope shares what he's known all along, that he is a boy, the support of his family and friends helps him take on any challenge. Jody Patterson, activist and chair of the Human Rights Campaign Foundation Board, shares her transgender son's experience in this important picture book about identity and acceptance. Show kids how much stronger we are when we are true to ourselves with Born Ready. Regina is not a little dinosaur. From Andrea Zuhl, the author-illustrator of Sweetie, comes an adorable, observant, and hilarious tale of a little dinosaur who wants independence, but might not be ready for it just yet. Children will recognize themselves in Regina and her story about balancing self-reliance with support. And I'll turn it over to Shaughnessy.
Hi, my name is Shaughnessy Miller. I am a library marketing coordinator on the school and library team, and I'm excited to share some nonfiction picture books with you. The first one is Sprouting Wings, the inspirational and true story of James Herman Banning, the first African-American pilot to fly across the country, comes to life in this picture book biography. In a journey that would span 3,300 miles, take 21 days, and inspire a nation, Banning proved that you can't put barriers on dreams. Louisa Jagger incorporates over 7 years of research, including Banning's own writings and an interview with the aviator's great-nephew. She teams up with co-writer Sherry Becker and award-winning illustrator Floyd Cooper to capture Banning's historic flight across the United States. This is a story that deserves to be told and taught. Next up, we have Goodnight Astronaut. As an astronaut, Scott Kelly is one of the few people who knows what it's like to sleep in space. But that's not the only unusual place he's slept. From the bottom of the ocean to Mount Everest Base Camp, the International Space Station, Scott will send readers to sleep dreaming of exploring the wildest places. And now we have Mornings with Monet. Claude Monet is one of the world's most beloved artists. He rejected the traditional life laid out clean and smooth before him. Instead, he chose a life of art, but not just any art, a new way of seeing that came to be called Impressionism. The stellar team that brought you the Caldecott Honor book, The Noisy Paint Box, explores another influential painter in a moving tribute to creativity, commitment, and new ways of seeing the world around you. And now I will send it back to Adrienne for middle grade.
Thank you. So now we are going to move on to middle grade. So in addition to the 3 books that you heard about from their authors in the beginning of the webinar, we feel that the next 4 books should also become instant classics. We're going to start off with The Star Outside My Window. New from Anjali Q. Ralph, the award-winning author of The Boy at the Back of the Class, comes a middle grade novel about the power of hope to sustain even when tragedy strikes. 10-year-old Anaya and her little brother Noah find themselves living in foster care after the sudden disappearance of their mom. With her life in disarray, Anaya knows just one thing for sure: her mom isn't gone forever, and she embarks on the adventure of a lifetime. This is an honest and yet empathetic exploration of how people respond to difficult circumstances, told through the innocent voice of a 10-year-old girl. And if you don't know this author, please check out her TEDx talk. She's doing some wonderful work with children. So that's The Star Outside My Window. And his 50th anniversary. In his new book, The Good War, he dives into important and timely lessons on hate speech, prejudice, and empathy in an accessible way that will be sure to spark classroom discussion. Can an after-school club where the students play a video game based on World War II change the way the students see each other and how they see the world? The haunting and poignant story of how a young Japanese girl's understanding of the historic and tragic bombing of Hiroshima is transformed by a memorial lantern floating ceremony. The author, Shao Kazuki, is a second-generation A-bomb survivor, and Soul Lanterns is her first novel translated for US readers. New from Newbery Award-winning favorite Karen Cushman, the author of Catherine Called Birdie and The Midwife's Apprentice, comes a story that tells a heartfelt and humorous story of World War II on the home front. Millie is growing up in California, learning to live with the US probably joining the war in Europe, food rationing, and a sickly younger sister. It's all Millie can do to stay calm and feel in control. But there is some fun too, mostly from surfer boy Rocky, who she just can't bring herself to talk to. In this new novel, Karen does a wonderful job of bringing us a main character who struggles with anxiety and grief in a way that is relatable for today's kids. And next will be Erica.
Hi. Okay, I'm here to talk about Katie the Cat Sitter. Katie the Cat Sitter is a new middle grade graphic novel series about growing up, friendship breakups, superheroes, supervillains, and cats. Lots of cats. Katie lands a job for her upstairs neighbor cat sitting, but something isn't quite right. For starters, her neighbor has 217 cats, and each one seems to have a unique talent. This book is packed with strong female characters and touches on the theme of animal protection. The book is sure to appeal to cat and superhero lovers alike. Pizza and Taco Best Party Ever is the second title in the Pizza and Taco graphic novel series, and it's perfect for beginning readers and those new to the graphic novel format. Pizza and Taco have the oh-so-relatable problem of not knowing what to do when boredom strikes. The answer? Throw a party. They have a location, a guest list, and decorations. Or do they? Colorful, fun pictures accompanying the simple sentences and the short chapter format are sure to get kids ready to read longer books. Ben Yokoyama and the Cookie of Doom and Ben Yokoyama and the Cookie of Endless Waiting are books 1 and 2 in the new Cookie Chronicles series. They are fun, quirky, and heartfelt stories about a literal-minded kid named Ben. In book 1, Ben opens a fortune cookie that reads, "Live each day as if it were your last." So he embarks on a mission to do just that by writing a bucket list. As he starts to make his way through it, he gets sidetracked and discovers new things about life. In book 2, Ben's fortune says, "Good things come to those who wait." Ben decides to take on a more passive role with his new philosophy instead of hopping into situations. Eventually, his patience starts paying off, but he also learns that waiting may not always be a good thing. These heavily illustrated high-low readers are sure to be a hit with kids. The Amazing Beef Squad. The Beef Squad is made up of a group of kids who are serious about pranks and also about doing whatever it takes to help people and the places in their town. The major friend group of this novel consists of 4 boys and 1 brilliant girl. Through scientific thinking and a competitive spirit, the kids try to uncover hidden truths about various people with plans for the town that will benefit a select few. The book is perfect for fans of the Terrible 2 series and those who just love a good prank. Finn in the Time-Traveling Pajamas is the second book in the Finniverse series by New York Times bestselling author Michael Buckley. When Finn is saved from the Time Rangers by an older version of himself, it comes with a catch. Old man Finn needs present-day Finn to time travel and help him win battles he lost years ago against the evil Paradox. When the time-traveling pajamas are damaged en route to their first destination, Finn and his friends suddenly find themselves trapped in time. This book is sure to appeal to kids who love action-packed stories about time travel. And finally, The Last Rabbit. This is a modern fairy tale about sisterhood, forgiveness, and redemption. During the war, the magician takes 4 little girls. They live on an enchanted island, but when it starts to sink, they are forced to leave one by one to find their own destiny. Albie, the last rabbit, begrudgingly boards a boat captained by a character referred to as Boy, and they set off into the unknown. Through twists and turns, readers see how one mistake can lead to many consequences, and that forgiveness and family are always within reach. Hand this to readers looking for the new middle grade fantasy adventures reminiscent of The Last Unicorn. And now I'll send it over to Natalie again.
Great. Thank you, Erica. I'm excited to tell you about just a couple of nonfiction books for middle grade. First, The Book of Dares. Ted Bunch and Anna Marie Johnson-Teague are parents and anti-violence educators who teamed up to create this book committed to helping boys develop a healthier concept of manhood. Boys will love the 100 original dares, and you will love the afterword, a resource on growing boys to be their most authentic selves. And Dreyer's English. This wildly popular, informative, and witty adult grammar guide, Dreyer's English, has now been adapted especially for kids. As entertaining as it is demystifying, this guide to English is for kids who love the power of language and for students or even adults who need to develop confidence in their writing skills. Dreyer's English for Young Readers is a handy book to have on any shelf. And now Kristen will tell us about some young adult.
Hi, everyone. This is Kristen Schultz. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager on the School and Library team, and I'm going to kick it off with some upcoming contemporary young adult fiction, perfect for book groups, independent reading, and for readers with a variety of tastes. Chlorine Sky is a novel in verse from Mahogany L. Brown, and it's a gritty and heartbreaking coming-of-age story about a young girl stepping out of the shadow of her former best friend. Nick Stone says it is a profound reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary thing a girl can be is herself. And Jason Reynolds calls Chlorine Sky a story about heart and backbone and one only Mahogany L. Browne could bring forth. Mahogany is a writer, educator, activist, mentor, and curator. Her poetry picture books include Black Girl Magic and Woke Baby. We have a guide available that includes discussion questions and writing activities. Go to the next. Holly Jackson's Good Girl, Bad Blood is the sequel to the addictive New York Times bestselling A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. The story picks up with Pip, our favorite high school student turned detective, as she is releasing a podcast about the solved murder case. But then someone goes missing and Pip is back at it, uncovering more of her town's dark secrets. The series is perfect for fans of true crime podcasts, and for your readers who love to write mysteries, we have a very thorough creative writing guide available. Home is Not a Country is a mesmerizing novel in verse about a Muslim American girl dealing with family, identity, and finding herself in the most unexpected places. Nima doesn't feel understood by her mother or her suburban town. As the ground is pulled out from under her, Nima must grapple with the phantom of a life not chosen. Elizabeth Acevedo calls Home is Not a Country nothing short of magic. Safia is one of the best writers of our times. We have available discussion guide with questions and writing prompts. American Patia is the story of a young artist grappling with first love, family boundaries, and the complications of a cross-cultural relationship. Winner of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators Emerging Voices Award, Anuradha D. Rajukar braids together themes of sexuality, artistic expression, and appropriation. And she gives voice to a girl claiming ownership of her identity, one shattered stereotype at a time. Educator E.B. Vickers' Fade Away is an edge-of-your-seat addictive read. At 8:53 p.m., thousands of people watched as Jake Foster secured the state title for his basketball team. But by the next morning, he's disappeared without a trace. Told from the points of view of those closest to Jake, this gripping novel reminds us that the people we think we know best are sometimes hiding the most painful secrets. The story includes a timely topic that's increasingly relevant to teens' lives. Opioid addiction is very much in the news and will continue to be as the impact of addiction and lawsuits continue. And last in this grouping is Everyone Dies Famous in a Small Town. From award-winning author Bonnie Sue Hitchcock comes a lyrical and heartfelt collection that connects the lives of young people from small towns in Alaska and the American West. Each story is unique, yet universal. In this book, the impact of wildfire, a wayward priest, or a mysterious disappearance ricochet across communities, threading through stories. On the surface, it seems that nothing ever happens in these towns, but underneath the surface, teenagers' lives blaze with fury, with secrets, and with love so strong it burns a path to the future. Everyone Dies Famous in a Small Town is for fans of literary fiction, linked short stories, and unconventional storytelling. And now we'll move on to fantasy.
Hello again, this is Shaughnessy. The first fantasy young adult I'm going to tell you about is The Gilded Ones. When 16-year-old Dika starts bleeding gold, everyone thinks she's a monster until actual monsters invade the kingdom. Now it's up to Dika and other girls like her to save it. The start of a bold and immersive West African-inspired feminist fantasy series for fans of Children of Blood and Bone and Black Panther. In this world, girls are outcast by blood and warriors by choice. Next is Rebel Daughter. In the 1st century, a small Jewish province rebelled against the Roman Empire. Legions of well-trained and fearsome soldiers were sent to crush the rebellion. They destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. At stake was the survival of the Jewish people. Based on a true story, Rebel Daughter is about a young woman determined to protect her family at all costs, to live her life in freedom and dignity, and to find love. And now Adrian's going to share about some nonfiction titles.
Yes, we have a nice group of nonfiction for young adults, which we're really proud of. And the first we are very, very honored to be bringing from the best-selling author of The Water Dancer and Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates now adapted his adult memoir for younger readers. He tells his story and explores how boys become men, and quite specifically, how he became the man he is. Coates details with candor the challenges of dealing with his tough love father, the influence of his mother, and the dynamics of his extended family, including his brother, who was on a very different path. He also tells of his family struggles at school and with girls, making this a timely story that is very relatable. This is a very important read, and that would be perfect for community or school reads. And we also have a great discussion guide for this book as well that you can find on our website. Let's Talk About It is what we believe the first YA graphic novel about body image, relationships, and sex ed. Using words and pictures together is the perfect way to talk to teens about the facts of life. It covers relationships, friendships, gender, sexuality, anatomy, body image, safe sex, sexting, jealousy, rejection, and a lot more. Let's Talk About It is a great handbook for every teen. And if you have a reader that would rather not have their questions answered in graphic novel form, we have Puberty is Gross, but also really awesome, which is one of the best titles ever. Readers will get the whole picture with the honest, humorous, and empowering survival guide to the tween years, packed with easy to understand scientific information, interesting studies, and tips from experts. This is an inclusive take on puberty made with today's progressive and diverse kids in mind. This book does not assume gender identities or sexualities and educates kids on how to speak to these differences throughout. And for something different, if you are a fan of the show Top Chef, or if you are a foodie, or if you are a fan of the adult version of his memoir, you will know about Kwame Anawachi's story and rise to fame in the culinary world. Becoming a known chef is never easy, but as a Black individual, it was even more difficult due to inherent racism in the culinary world. Kwame's hard work, determination, and skills help him earn the respect and accolades he deserves. It's perfect for readers interested in the restaurant world or anyone that wants an uplifting, inspiring, true story. And then our last book is Violet and Daisy. Sarah Miller is the author of The Miracle and Tragedy of the Dion Quintuplets, which received 4-star reviews, and The Borden Mysteries, which was a School Library Journal Best Book and Quick Pick for reluctant readers. She now turns her writing to the absorbing and compulsively readable story of Violet and Daisy Hilton, conjoined twins who were the sensation of the US sideshow circuits in the 1920s and 30s. There was even, their story was also turned into a Broadway musical called Sideshow that some of you might remember. The author gives us a completely compelling, empathetic portrait of two sisters whose physical bond was the cause of their greatest misfortunes. However, that bond was so important to them, Violet forfeited her life to Daisy in the end, rather than break it. And on that dramatic note, those are the highlights of the Random House Children's Books Spring List. Thank you again to our authors, Chrystal, David, and Jenny, for joining us. Thank you to Booklist, and thank you to all of you for joining us. I know this is the start of a very busy week. And if you are attending ALA Midwinter, we would love for you to please visit us at our booth. And if you have any questions, please contact us at slmarket@prh.com. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so much, Adrian, and the rest of the Random House team, Kristen, Natalie, Shaughnessy, Erica, as well as David, Chrystal, and Jenny. This was fantastic. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones, like those you see here. If you haven't already, be sure to check out Booklist Reader, where Booklist contributors post daily about all things books and library land. And while you're perusing Booklist online, be sure to check out Book Links, a quarterly supplement to Booklist, perfect for educators and school librarians. It is now freely available to all. To start reading, just click the cover image located within the left column of our homepage. Not yet a subscriber? Pair the page-by-page reading experience of print with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of this special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. One more thank you to our sponsor, Random House Children's Books, and this concludes today's webinar.